Hi, welcome to the October 18th meeting of the CNCF IoT Edge Working Group. On the agenda today, so far, we have two items, but members are welcome to late add other things. And if we run out of agenda items, we'll go to free-form birds of a feather discussion. The items we have are discussing the IoT Edge Working Group activities at KubeCon North America in early November. And the second item that was a carryover from last week was discussing the K2D project that was originated by Portainer, which is an effort to put a Kubernetes API facade on top of a Docker runtime. I'm thinking that at least one person, Andy, said he'd be here for that discussion of the working group activities at KubeCon, and he hasn't arrived yet. So maybe even though it's first on that agenda list, we'll postpone that a bit unless somebody has something that they think is ready to go regarding that. Okay, moving on. I wasn't sure if Neil was going to join us, but he's not here so far. But I went and just played around in my home lab with the K2D. I was able to pretty much follow the instructions in the docs. The docs are generally, I'd say, good. The one issue I did notice was that it says that if you're running on a host with a single network interface, providing the IP of the host is optional in the install, but I couldn't get it to work unless I did that. Other than that, the install pretty much just worked. I was then able on this emulated pseudo Kubernetes cluster, and I call it a pseudo cluster because even the K2D project itself indicates that it is not a goal to pass the Kubernetes Soda Boy compliance test. So it doesn't, by design, it does not implement full Kubernetes. But I was able to run the Hello World app that is provided by the Kind project, and that seemed to work. I went on to use one of the examples provided in the K2D doc, which is running a Mosquito MQTT broker. It did appear to run, but I was not able to expose it externally. I think it just might be that I was doing this literally last night, so I didn't have any time to troubleshoot it. The K2D indicates that it supports a service type of load balancer, but I didn't see any steps that have you install a load balancer. If you install Kubernetes itself in an on-prem edition as opposed to a public cloud where they have a cloud provider load balancer, you normally would go through a step of installing a load balancer, but I didn't see one. So maybe that would be a requirement and I didn't do it. And that might explain why my Mosquito broker was only visible inside the Kubernetes single node cluster and not outside. But I need to put some more work into it. But my summary of it is that it seems to be an interesting concept, and I think it does work. Maybe with some growing pains, it is labeled a beta, but I intend to put a little more time into investigating it. I wish Andy was here because I had a sidebar discussion with him in Slack DMs on the concept of, if you start with this premise that this K2D might be an interesting way to get Kubernetes-like interfaces on very low resource nodes. The second move on the chessboard is how do you manage these? Suppose you have thousands of these. Um, how are you going to manage and use them at scale? And the KubeStellar project that Andy is running might be a good solution here. So we were talking about that and seemed to both agree that it might be a good fit, but like I say, we need further investigation to try it out. Anyway, that's my summary of K2D. Don't know if anybody else after the meeting 2 weeks ago investigated it at all. We did have a pretty long discussion in the thread on in the working group's Slack channel. So there definitely are members who were looking at it, but I don't know if any of them are on the call. Okay, we'll move on from that. And I'm still a little hesitant to jump into KubeCon. If anybody's got anything else that they want to bring up and mention while we're waiting for a few more people to arrive.
I think another topic I just threw on the agenda is that it's KubeCon, but it's not this KubeCon. CFPs for KubeCon EU close November 26th, so that's about 5 weeks away. And so kind of a call to I believe we get a maintainer track talk. No longer are those guaranteed, but we should be able to submit one. Correct me if I'm wrong, Steve. But maybe we can go ahead and try and prioritize having a talk about our latest white paper be that maintainer track talk.
Yeah, that has always been the case in the past. And those maintainer track talks, the CFPs go out after the main ones. So as far as I know, they are not open yet. You would go into the Slack channel, or it's on the Kubernetes Slack as opposed to the CNCF Slack, I think. It's where they would typically put those. And I think we normally get email invitations of those, and I haven't seen one. So I suspect that for KubeCon Europe isn't open yet. And it's typical for those invites to come out maybe a month to 6 weeks behind the regular CFPs. So I think it might be a little early stages for that at this point. But yeah, I'd agree that it should be a goal of this group to pursue one of those. And I think because they have reduced the size number of days of KubeCon, that they're more competitive than they used to be, so that we should expect to have to invest some time into putting together a pretty polished CFP like you would do to compete in the realm of the normal CFPs for a KubeCon.
Yeah, I think that we should in the least figure out what that process is like, because it would be upsetting to say, don't submit for regular. We'll have this maintainer track that comes out a month after you lost your chance for regular. So um, we can try
Yeah,
and get more details on that ideally. If not, there's also the option to submit for the regular KubeCon sessions.
yeah, that might be, we could just do it for regular. Maybe we'll be told that we should resubmit, but it might be an incentive to kind of get us off our chairs and doing the work rather than it. Sad to say, but I think CFPs in general often are exercises in procrastination, practically speaking. And I've been guilty of that a lot of times myself. So I'll agree with that, Kate, that shooting for putting it in as a regular, I don't see any downside to that. I'm not in a position where I think I can take lead on that, but if somebody else wants to. Speaking of CFPs, I'm going to drop another link in the chat for the Scale conference. That's an annual conference held in Los Angeles in March. It's actually in Pasadena, a suburb of Los Angeles. It is the largest independent open source conference in North America, drawing thousands of people. And once again, like last year, it's being co-branded with the CNCF as a Kubernetes Community Day event. They call those community day events, but Scale is in fact 4 days long. And they have a dedicated track for, I don't think they call it Edge and IoT, but essentially that's what it is. I think they put the word embedded in there and a few other things, but certainly the typical Edge IoT type talks would be prime material for that conference. And then there's a cloud native track as well, which is typically where Kubernetes and container, to some extent, WebAssembly talks have been landing. There are about a dozen tracks, so the odds are you can find a track that would be appropriate. There's also an AI track for any kind of intersection of AI and Edge that might pertain to some people who are joining these calls. So I'd encourage people to submit to that. It's open until November 1, I believe. And it's a nice conference. It's quite unusual, meaning that it's very non-commercial. It's very family friendly. So to the point where it runs on Thursday through Sunday, but on the weekend, they actually have a kids track, which is sessions specifically intended to inform and educate under 18, and also a track with speakers who are under age 18. So if you've never been there, I highly encourage it. Okay, anything else on the agenda? Let me take a look. I don't see it. I don't know. I guess we can jump into KubeCon North America, even though I think the one thing we'll push to the end is the idea of a presentation at the TAG runtime event, because I think we would like to have Andy here for that. Kate?
I think Brandon went unmuted, so I just wanted to check and see if you had something you wanted to say.
Hey, sorry about that. No, I was wondering too about the KubeCon. I was pinging Andy to see if he might be able to hop on. Hopefully he will. From my side, on the paper, just a quick update. I've seen the version in Figma that was very close to what we're going to want for the finished product. Made a few suggestions and edits in that, and have asked the marketing team to produce a PDF, and that was about 10 days ago. So I just asked them recently where that stands and when we can expect it, but I think it's safe to say we'll have this in hand before KubeCon, which was the goal.
One thing I wanted to ask some of you people who were more leads on the white paper than I am. I was sitting there debating whether I qualified to be on the list as a reviewer or not. I don't want to self-invite myself if my participation was just kind of a token level, but I'll leave it up to you if you want to put me there or not, and rather than self-nominate myself. So,
well, thank you for your humility, but we definitely want to include you.
Okay, well, thanks. The other things that were brought up as possibilities at KubeCon North America was perhaps having a face-to-face get-together. He's not here, but at the last meeting, Neil Cresswell of Portainer threw out the idea that they are hosting a suite in a hotel next to KubeCon, and they might be amenable to having a meeting there in that suite, which sounded like a nice possibility to me. Or plan B might be to just join at one of the conference lunches, to just set aside a particular table with a sign where those of us who will physically be there can get together. Or alternative C would be an evening event where we just self-host over dinner or drink somewhere in the neighborhood. We still have a couple of weeks, so we don't have to commit now, but I would be open to any of those three options. And I would like to have a face-to-face meeting though, because I found that in past KubeCons when they've did this is where, you know, you really feel you get to meet and interact with people at a different level than what you see over these Zoom meetings. And I just think it helps you understand people's personalities and things a little better once you've met them face to face. I think we established last time that we might have 5 to 10 people who are members of this group at that event. It's kind of hard to say because I know the trend continues in the industry as I read the news of layoffs and tech companies cutting travel budgets. So I have also, as a program committee member, been encountering a number of issues where accepted speakers are now facing travel difficulties. So you never know up until the day of the conference, I guess, these days.
For deciding what format to do, maybe we start a thread on the Slack channel, given that we can have more people chime in, maybe a voting poll or something. And then the broader audience who can't be here on the call can chime in.
Yeah, a poll sounds like a great idea in terms of when we do it, because some people have constraints too on what days they arrive, or whether you know, in some cases, I know I've been faced with issues where my own employer has some conflicting event that I have to go to and wouldn't be able to attend on certain evenings. The lunch is usually pretty open. Gap is usually pretty open though, as long as the schedule doesn't have sessions going on and people aren't in a position where they're stuck with booth duty. There is, by the way, Kate, maybe you've heard more on this, but I thought that there was going to be a booth running for applications. That came up in a meeting I attended, and there was supposed to be, I think the organizer said they were going to put out a spreadsheet or something to allow people to sign up for presentation slots, but I never did see any follow-up on that.
Yeah, I don't remember them saying a spreadsheet, but I remember you asking for that follow-up from them. I would highly doubt that's going to happen. I feel like these things, those don't happen often, but I would bet that we could potentially do something like impromptu at the booth where you could go up and present what you have. I think it's less formal. So they might do something where like you could show up to the booth and like grab the monitor for an hour, but yeah, I doubt that they'll follow up on that. But we're welcome to keep pinging them on it. But I wouldn't promise that we're gonna get that.
Yeah, the one concern I'd have is if they don't go with that formality of a sign-up sheet, is that then there's no ability to pre-publish it. So the only audience you're going to have is just random passersby, which probably, you know, isn't going to produce any large numbers. You never know, though. Maybe I'm just a horrible speaker, so I couldn't pull it off. But if you're celebrity grade, maybe it works regardless. Okay, I see Andy has joined us. So Andy, welcome. We postponed the item in the agenda of discussing the planned group presence at the TAG runtime meeting. So if you've got your microphone available, we can open that up for discussion now. And I'll turn it over to join this discussion. You, Andy, and I think Brandon and Kate probably have more to do with this
Also
than I do.
Joel.
Oh, Joel too.
Okay, yeah, hey, thanks, well, thanks for having. Sorry I'm late, I lost the invite, I guess I must have canceled it on my end. So what, I think Joel and I had a general question for the community here is what would it sounds like the meeting is going to be a little bit more general than just talking about specific topics related to the paper. And we wanted to know if the portion that that we would be a part of is something that you'd like us to talk more generally about the IoT Edge and its work, or if you'd like us to be more specific about the paper.
In my opinion, I think it should be an opportunity to talk about the paper. I think if I were attending a session like that, I think I would be interested in learning something and getting a takeaway. And the paper is exactly that. It's very edifying. And even when we give talks representing the working group, we normally are talking about something we have done. And then the last slide is just, hey, if you're interested in participating in the next thing we do, here's the resources. And so that's kind of what, if I were going for it, would do. It would be kind of a slide, like slides that walk through the paper, the sections,
Okay.
all of it. And then the last slide is just kind of we meet at these times. This is like the purview of our working group, the end. And another thing that Ricardo mentioned in that thread is that we should publicize it. Obviously, it's hard to publicize because it keeps becoming hard for them to get back to us at like what our time slot is. But maybe we can, if people in their own channels can publicize like, hey, there's the runtime tag is having this meetup where everyone within it is presenting all the interesting work they're doing. We will be presenting this. See you there. And then follow up with a more specific time after.
Okay.
Let me throw this out too. Already, because I'm program committee for that Kubernetes on the Edge Day, we will have a single or a 2-slide summary of what happens in this working group with links to how to join, how to find the videos, recordings on YouTube, etc. And I've done those historically, but I need to do a refresh. But I can get you 1 or 2 slides that you can put into whatever presentation you have. And
that
then I'll put some speaker notes there, but you're free to ad lib and say whatever you want over the slides. So there'll just be a page of, links for resources out of this group. Edit it if you like, or not. And I would expect that would take maybe 1 minute to go through, that portion, maybe 2 minutes if you're slow at speaking, but something on that order. And I'll commit to getting that to you. I don't know if you can live with a week before the event. I'm usually a little late at these things, but if you want it earlier, I'll sign up to getting it to you 1 week from today.
Okay.
And I'll do that. There is usually a published CNCF PowerPoint template for these events. So I'll do it on that template so that sometimes if you cut and paste slides out of a different template, they get horribly mangled, but I'll do it on the standard template form.
Okay.
The other things that we did bring up, before you got here, was the idea of having some sort of a face-to-face meeting at KubeCon. I think we've decided there's 3 options. We meet during the standard conference lunch, just designating a location, the table, whatever. Number 2, we pick an evening and meet over dinner and or drinks somewhere in the vicinity of the convention center. And the third is that last week, Neil Cresswell of Portainer said that they were renting a suite across from the convention center, might be amenable to hosting a group meeting. I think what we'll do is closer to the event, we'll post a poll in the Slack channel and just get people to indicate preferences of which of those and which of those formats and what day or time works best for them.
Okay.
It kind of sounds, based on the participation in last week's meeting, that we'd expect 5 to 10 people to show up. If we want to open it up to more, to people who just discover this group at the event, we can do that potentially, depending on what our venue looks like. Certainly, if we're just going to do it over conference lunch, we probably have open-ended capacity. But that way we maybe could get new group members who just discovered this group at KubeCon to show up. I think that's always good too, because you know, that's what kind of builds participation. So anything else that in terms of that presentation, I think we've resolved that this is going to be primarily about the white paper. So I'll leave it to the speakers to put together some kind of a presentation on that. And I think it would be great. I assume that this is consensus based on past discussions, that we'll move that white paper up to a more formal state then, so we can declare that this is no longer a draft, but that this is version whatever of the publication, and that you could download it on a GitHub repo.
Okay, very good.
I think Brandon mentioned at the beginning of this meeting that it should be published by that point. Like the CNCF marketing team should have a published version. So I don't think we need to publish it to GitHub, but I think, yeah, if that can be our like last minute push to GitHub if it's not published at that point. And also something you missed, Andy, is we were briefly discussing KubeCon North America. So one thing to keep in mind when you're creating this presentation is this is something that could be recycled into a Europe, sorry. This could be recycled into a CFP for KubeCon North America.
Oh,
Or you mean a CFP for KubeCon Europe?
KubeCon Europe?
Yes, once again, I kept saying North America. Sorry, I'm
Okay.
just attached
No,
to this
no problem.
continent.
Hey, that's cool.
Yeah.
All right, good. Yeah, no, these are all positive things. I really appreciate all the work that's been going on in the background. I know, speaking on behalf of the authors and all the folks that have been involved here. So really just want to say a great big thank you and a debt of gratitude. Appreciate all the hard work that's going on behind the scenes to help us get there. We'll do the right thing by I'll come up with a presentation. Maybe I'll start thumbing one together with Joel. I have some time on Friday, so I'll start pushing some pieces together and see if I can get something that looks and feels. We can get something that looks and feels like it would amply represent the community, and then maybe share it with you before we meet again.
That sounds good. And thanks to all of you who've been working so hard on this for a long time now. It'll be nice when it comes together. The other thing that I think that this is a great opportunity to build awareness, and the tag runtime is, I think, medium to good on that scale, but it almost is like preaching to the choir in that I'm not so sure how many, attendees off the street are going to encounter that session. And one way to do that is that I think we could probably up the coverage of this by interacting with some of the press and analyst groups that typically show up at a KubeCon. Now, most of those people, I think, are going to be sitting in those day one sessions rather than circulating around. I have rarely encountered them in things like Contributor Summit and the things that are kind of meetings for the internal workers on these open source projects, but there still is potentially an opportunity to interact with them later in the week. Some of those people now even have create booths on the show floor where they do interviews with people from projects. And they sometimes do go around to the kiosks for the open source projects and things. So maybe we can come up with a plan to use personal contacts with those kinds of people to get them aware of this. And I think if they become aware, they'll be amenable to conducting, these are usually come down in the form of they'll show up there with an interview for their podcast or something like that. And then some of these people also do some blogging, and we might be able to get a little bit of coverage that way.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, any additional coverage is fantastic. I think it'll have that kind of organic feel to it as we progress on the show floor and with the other parts, and I think it'll come together. I have a good feeling about it.
Okay, sounds good. Are we done with this topic then? Or anybody with further
My questions
remarks?
are satisfied. I don't, Joel, if you have anything to add.
No, Andy, we can sync up outside of this. The one looking at, I think, Kate, what you provided Enrico, if that's goes by. This is going to take place within the project pavilion. Is that like a table working group type of session, or is this, like, hey, here's a place to present from with people to sit in, like a typical session? I've gotten my questions answered that you brought up, Andy, and they were the same ones. We can simply walk through the paper. The one addition I would have to what Kate said is, hey, what would you all want to hear or talk about within an IoT Edge working group, and the call to action of, hey, here's how you contribute. But back to do we know what the environment is going to be for this discussion or presentation? And is it more presentation or more discussion?
That's a great question, and I don't know, but I'm going to ping in that same channel for Ricardo right now. I would hope there's a monitor and a place to hook your laptop up if they're using the word session, but we can certainly advocate for that. So I'm just going to ping him now.
Just based on past KubeCons, if they use the term project pavilion, that is typically, I assume you've been to any standard tech conference, usually has the exhibit hall where it's pay to play and vendors or projects can rent a big booth space that has room for multiple people. The project pavilions are something the CNCF does for open source projects, and they're just really just a little tower with a monitor, a keyboard, usually an extension cord run so that you can get power, and enough room for easily 4 people to stand around, and in a crunch, maybe a dozen really packed around. But just picture something like a kiosk the size of, I don't know, a bank ATM or something in terms of physical size, and people crowded around it. Now, this TAG working group day 1 event, I sort of had the impression that might be in a room, sort of like what they do for contributor summits, where it's more like a meeting space with room for quite a crowd sitting in chairs. But they've also talked about having a kiosk running for the length of the conference that I would expect would be more just like one of these single monitor tower scenarios that you could sign up for slots at. And I think that's independent of the presentation they're asking for. But I'm just speculating here. If Kate can follow up, that'd be great. And I see you've got your hand raised, so go for it.
Yeah, this runtime session, I was just looking at the link, which I'm sharing in the chat. It's not in the project pavilion. It'll be in a specified room if I remember from past years. I was just trying to see if they changed that or something, but I also messaged Ricardo, but no, this'll be in a room and not in the project pavilion, so there should be a monitor. And the project pavilion, like Steve was saying, has to do with that second concept of the kiosk, which is disorganized, and I don't think will be an opportunity with the way that that things are coming along there. Beyond, maybe we can have some people, you could probably just walk up to there and say you're a part of the IoT Edge working group and take some space there and share thoughts there. But yeah, those are two separate things that we've kind of been discussing at the same time. So we should have a monitor, and it should be session format to close that up.
If they do have project pavilions, one thing I'm totally amenable to as a leader of this group, but I'll leave it to Kate and some of the other co-chairs to voice possibly conflicting opinions. But I'm totally supportive of any open source project that wants to get eyeballs and willing to, if there's slots at one of these kiosks for projects that aren't big enough to have their own dedicated kiosk for the length of the whole conference, I'd be willing to put my name behind them getting a slot to present there. Just, I wouldn't expect you'll get huge audience, but hey, you can at least tweet out that you presented at a kiosk at KubeCon, maybe make a video, and you got to start from somewhere. So anybody out here, KubeStellar or I'm not sure if anybody from any other projects out here might be in a position where they would consider that useful, but I pretty much back anything as long as it's open source. The other thing I guess we should establish, if we're going to try to socially promote attendance at this event, would be whether whatever room it's in is open to the general public on a regular KubeCon badge, or whether you need the special day one add-on to get there. That has to do with where in the building they put it, usually on whether they're going to, what grade of badge they're going to be checking for. We should be able to ask somebody.
I have a question. I didn't put my hand up, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. I don't care
Okay.
about hands. It's
All
a
right.
small group.
That's all right. I just have a question. There's a slot open from 1 to 2 p.m. and it looks like it's empty for, am I reading that right?
This is the link that Kate posted?
Yeah.
I don't know. Let me look at it. I hadn't opened it.
Sorry, that link is really confusing. That has nothing. The only thing to be looking at that link is the top box. When you see morning from 8 to noon, you'll see tag runtime. That's the only thing about this link that gives us any information about the event.
I see.
As for what we're seeing in the afternoon there, those are for like project working sessions, essentially. So like, say you had a project that you wanted to dedicate a specific session. This is what I'm interpreting this as. You wanted to dedicate a working session for, and you are a Kubernetes, you are a CNCF. I think you have to be incubating or graduating.
Okay.
Sandbox doesn't count for this. You can reserve a spot here
Okay. Great.
and publicize it.
Very cool. Thank you.
So we have like 17 minutes left, and I just wanted to, I feel like we've discussed the KubeCon arrangements a fair bit, but for folks who can't make KubeCon or in general, are there other topics that people want to discuss or things that they stumbled upon that they wanted to bring up?
First of all, really envy you guys who go to KubeCon, so I hope you would go. I said I've been really going to the RF Edge community, just trying to go to the meetings which is actually active. So in the KubeCon, I know there RFEdge people will be there as well. So according to the IoT Edge charter, one of the item is educate and inform the users of unbiased information regarding edge computing related to CNCF projects. Ideally, it will be some going forward, because I know there's a lot more broader topic discussed in the RF Edge, although I'm not sure how many of them are active. Ideally, there'll be some collaborations to give those really more clear picture of what's going on in both communities. And yeah, ideally, like be a kind of landscape information for anyone new to edge computing, can give more clear definition of what kind of problems are still to be resolved, especially. Yeah, I think that would be nice to some discussion at KubeCon between this group and Airfetch.
Okay, that sounds good. I think Tina is definitely going to be at the Kubernetes on Edge Day event and representing LF-Edge. So typically she has had a summary slide of LF-Edge activity in the closing of that event.
That would be great. So if it's going to be a list of projects, I don't know, it's hard to describe what I'm trying to look for as a newbie to edge computing. Yeah, what kind of business problem are there? What kind of technologies that's available, and how to categorize them, and what like things that still need to be resolved yet. That'd be great.
Okay, that sounds good. Andy, now that you're here, you and I at the beginning of this meeting, I was talking a little bit about K2D and how just last night I procrastinated and got around to evaluating K2D after Neil gave a little talk on it at the meeting 2 weeks ago. I was able to successfully get that running on a Ubuntu VM following pretty much the instructions as given.
I know it's simple, it's straightforward, but for some reason I couldn't get the kube config. I wish it, yeah, I want it to work. Believe me, I'd love to see it.
Yeah, I got the kube config. The one hiccup I had was that the docs indicated that if you're on a host with a single network interface, that you didn't have to provide the host IP address, but I found I had to provide the host IP address. So once I did that, that second step where you just curl the kube config just worked for me.
Yeah. I put it into bridge mode. You know, I put it on bridge because that's what it says the Mac supports, and I gave it the IP address from my private network as you know what I was what my if config said, and yeah, it seemed there was no problem bringing up the container. It was just not, I couldn't connect to it, so I don't know what was causing it. I also have kind on here, so I noticed that here, I'll show you what this looks like today. If you don't mind, if I could share just a second.
Oh, okay, just a minute. Let me make you a co-host.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, mine I think was maybe simpler. I was just running a Ubuntu VM on top of a vSphere hypervisor, and a little less going on than running it on a Mac.
Yeah, so you could see like what I thought was interesting here. If you do the Docker PS there, you're not seeing, like, it should show a port over here, and it's not. So to me, that's it's not accessible. You know what I mean?
Right.
If
Yeah.
I look at Docker logs, it shows me I should be able to get it. Damn it. Ugh, come on. I don't know how I'm stuck here, but I'm stuck. Let me try this again here. Do I even have? Oh, something else is going on. Oh, there it is. Yeah. So there's the run, and then you'll see that it's banging into a wall. So there's nothing to, there's no port exposure. So I've got to look up and see why that's not exposing something, unless it was a conflict with one of these, which I don't think it should be, but I'll find out.
Yeah.
So, but yes, the idea there is, anything that can provide us with a small anything that can provide other people with a small footprint control plane is fantastic. I think all of these projects have merit. We have one of our own in KubeSteller called KubeFlex, which is somewhat similar, and you're free to experiment with that too.
Okay, well, I think that wraps up what we can do on K2D. Anybody else got any topics? We've got another 10 minutes or so.
I have something I can propose.
Sure.
So in past meetings, we've talked about defining what it would be to be like a leaf node for very constrained devices. There's something that we've been working on, and it is directly related to the Kubernetes open source C client. So within our VxWorks real-time operating system, we actually have a C version of the kubelet from the open source Kubernetes GitHub running on VxWorks, and it's able to deploy containers. And this would specifically be for far edge devices. Where we'd like to go with this is we'd like to have a conversation about what are the core Kubernetes APIs, specifically to sort of define a device node or leaf node type. I'd be happy to do a presentation on some of the things we did in a future meeting. I just want to make sure to respect making sure that it's about the open source part and not about the real-time operating system part as much. Is this something that you'd be interested in hearing more about?
Yeah, definitely. A few questions even come to mind immediately. Like, one of the interesting concepts here is that by running a kubelet there, you make yourself part of a Kubernetes node. And there have been historically, over a period of 5 years, a couple different approaches to how you solve the low resource issue. One is to turn this low resource node into a Kubernetes cluster node, like one node that's part of a multi-node cluster. And that would be, I think, your approach of running a kubelet on it. The second approach is to turn that low resource into a full Kubernetes cluster. And there are pluses and minuses of both, but I can tell you that historically, one of the problems people have run into with that kubelet approach is that the Kubernetes internals that build the control plane expect some latency parameters on how much delay there is and how much reliability there is in being able to contact a cluster node. And typically these low resource nodes also bring with them, maybe you have a unique situation, but it's not uncommon to not only have low resource, but also very poor and intermittent networking. And if you've got that constraint coming in at the same time, that tends to wreak havoc, because Kubernetes wasn't built to have slow, unreliable connections to those cluster nodes. And it causes it to attempt to do remediation of workloads that thought it deployed. And often, what happens is that it's working against you as much as for you. So that this approach like K2D of declaring it to be a full cluster in and of itself doesn't necessarily have those networking and latency, the same networking and latency issues. So I would like you to start with even like a discussion of the architectural decisions in terms of how and why you went with that approach rather than the other one.
Right. A lot of those other approaches tend to be focusing on the IoT use case. That is certainly a valid use case here, but a lot of the people that are using VxWorks are building systems at the edge. So if you think of a commercial or military aircraft as a system of devices, the constraint that you described with the intermittent networking may not apply because we're
Got it.
talking about networking within the plane. But it is certainly something we'd want to explore. One of the decisions we made, for example, was that we could not see a practical need for the overlay network in the first go around, because we think a lot of people really just want to deploy software to a specific device. So the ability to redeploy that software to another device in the cluster wasn't necessary. So and then the practical side of this too is that a lot of the overlay networks are written in Golang. So rather than go and rewrite Weave or Flannel or something in C, we first needed to focus on just getting things up and running. And this was relevant because of certification. You can't, there's no path to certification for Golang that I'm aware of.
Yeah, another consideration with going the kubelet approach as opposed to full cluster is that I think in a lot of these scenarios, even if it isn't IoT per se, and you've got guaranteed good networking, if you've got a scenario where the workloads are pretty much a one-to-one exact match, Kubernetes was made for a scenario where you combined resources into a pool of kind of homogeneous servers, and that you build efficiency by trying to shoot for utilization. In other words, really the workload could run on 1, 2, or 3 different servers and you don't care. But in a lot of these edge scenarios, you very much do care because they interact with very specific IO devices. If it can't run on that device, you don't really ever expect it to get redeployed on an alternative because it just doesn't make sense to do that. And I'm kind of thinking in your description of this being like an airplane, that my gut feeling is a lot of those workloads are going to be exactly that, where there's a one-to-one cardinality where this app, containerized app either runs at this specific cluster node or it doesn't make sense to run it at all. And, if that's what you're facing, perhaps that alternate of each leaf node being a cluster could work out better, but it depends on what problem you're trying to solve. But I'd be interesting to hear more on that in terms of how well this actually fits into the demands of the space.
Sure, I'd be happy to put that together. I won't be able to do it for the next meeting, but if I know that there's interest in it, then I could put the time into it. As a bit of a teaser, when I do a rough look at the amount of memory consumed by the kubelet, by my quick estimation, it looks like the text section of the running executable is about 6 megs, and the data section where memory is being allocated just store variables is 3 megs.
Okay, that sounds pretty doable then for embedded systems. Sure. So you're welcome to put yourself on the agenda. We have our standard shared agenda notes document. If nobody created a time slot, if you want to do this several months out, just cut and paste and make sections in that running document for whatever date you want and put yourself in there. Description, your name and the number of minutes you expect it to take, and just go for it.
Okay, sounds good. And again, my intent is to try to create a discussion about how to define the leaf node. So I'm hoping that it'll encourage a lively discussion.
And to whatever extent you have it, just to, historically I don't think we've ever had a serious abuse, but we had some allegations. Usually it was somebody upset that their competitor got some airtime, but the rules of the CNCF are that this is open source, so that if you do put it in the agenda and you have some GitHub repo that can point to some source code, just drop it in there preemptively as kind of the signal that I'm here to talk about something that's open source. Doesn't have to be a CNCF sandbox, incubator, or whatever, just open source, and that's fine.
Sure. Perhaps I could share the slides with you in advance as well, just to get your feedback on any changes I might want to make.
Sure, that sounds good. Got a couple minutes left. Anybody else got anything to bring up?
If there's nothing, I'd like to maybe ask Rob any trend you see going on in. I know the real-time operating system is popular in the edge computing domain. Is there anything you can share on any trend you're seeing for edge on real-time operating system?
I would say the big thing pushing this is IT/OT convergence, because you're now starting to see the IT department working directly with the people that are planning a lot of these types of environments, and they want to be able to talk the same language. They want to be able to use the same tooling to manage all of this equipment. And that's really what's driving this.
So basically, it's in the past, when it comes to real-time operating system, it's mostly IoT, kind of pure edge. Now you're saying the operation data center folks is trying to manage from a central point. Is that what you're saying?
I would point to like Industry 4.0, where previously you had the things on the floor were entirely separate from the business back end, but they're trying to liberate the data and make it possible to have all the machines talk with each other. And the moment they're starting to talk with each other and exchange information, then you have fewer barriers between these machines. And so the teams that are managing these machines also need to be able to talk to each other.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I'll add a little color based on historical experience working in these manufacturing and process plants too, that took place well before cloud native and containers was even a thing. It goes back to the 90s where you had dedicated proprietary hardware. And so for the most part, I think that's largely what is found out there in the real world today. But it's shifting to where the people who built those dedicated sensor and control pieces of equipment are using open source components inside them and trying to bring those up and bubble the information, either actual sensor data or event notifications, up into the bigger picture IT space. They have things now where they catalog all of these sensors and things, and there are some very interesting projects that kind of integrate those information flows. The other big trend, I'd say, I fully agree with Rob that the operational technology and information technology coalescence is taking place. But the other one is hosting AI and machine learning. I think that the story that there are really economic opportunities there that will change the world, that's real. And people need to be able to host those AI ML workloads out at the edge. The one that caught everyone's eye on Wall Street was these large language models like ChatGPT, but that's kind of a niche application. And I think the actual application of moving ML AI down closer to where the data originates is kind of a more compelling story. And it's necessary because you're getting much larger amounts of information. They have to be acted upon and reduced at the point of inception. You're never going to be able to afford the cost, latency wise, even economic and fault tolerance wise, of bringing all those things up to the big public clouds, analyzing it there with AI ML, and round tripping it back where you need to act on it. That just doesn't make any sense. And the world is seeing a big uptick, not just in software to do these, and it's early days. So I don't think that any one winner has materialized yet, but it's not just software, it's hardware, where everybody building these embedded systems is coming out with chips that have machine learning accelerators bundled into the packaging. And I think that once that happens, once users can get this package that combines a general purpose CPU with something that is AI ML accelerator capable, you need the software story to go along with that. And so far, there isn't one obvious software story. There's no equivalent of, in the early days of containers, you had container wars where you had Kubernetes, Mesos, you had Docker Swarm, and it took years for it to kind of coalesce. This AI ML at Edge is big, but that coalescing has not taken place. It's kind of in land grab mode for what the right solutions are. And that makes it very interesting, but it may also make it challenging to keep up. But I think that's one of the things that it might be that I'm self-directing myself to read things happening in that space, but I think it's huge, and I think it's a huge opportunity.
No, we're already past time, but maybe just follow-up question. Well, where do you see that on the hardware side still can improve or get better for the real-time operating system and IT, OT convergence?
On the hardware side, I think that so you mentioned real-time operating systems. I think that the biggest challenge is the time and space partitioning so that you can run the safety critical and non-safety critical workloads side by side. And the hardware has been getting better and better, but I think the big challenge will be to make it easy enough that you can prove that it's safe to run those workloads side by side, because you're going to need to consolidate, because you can't have multiple devices in those locations, because often there's only one spot for the device to exist, and it's very costly to send someone to go set up that device. So the ability to not only run those workloads side by side, but do continuous updates for the reasons that Steve just alluded to, I think will be very important. And the hardware needs to help support that.
Performance is no longer a big issue. It's rather the security is the biggest problem.
What did you say is no longer a big issue? I missed that.
Being real time means performance, right? Just the consistent performance, scheduling performance. So that's no longer the biggest issue. The biggest issue I described is more of a security issue.
So I've stopped talking about real time in terms of a number, because I found that in the literature, the best description was in a hard real-time system, if you miss your deadline, the system is having a critical failure and can no longer function. And then when you start to think of it in that terms, it doesn't really matter what the actual number is. It all comes down to how do you make sure that it's got freedom from interference, and how do you make sure that no matter what you do, you're able to hit that deadline all the time. And so in that case, you need to think not only about time, but space, because a single memory scribbler could affect the critical functionality of that system. And you need to make sure that partitioning is airtight.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay, I think we've reached time, so it's interesting. Maybe we can continue this, or this actually might be a great segue into this presentation Rob is talking about at a future meeting. So let's continue it then. But thanks everybody for attending, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Sounds good. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.